evil, right? The battle, the classic structure between sin and righteousness, good and evil, darkness and light, right? That's the classic battle, starting in the garden and has never stopped. Between health and disease, just think of all the opposites, that life is this ongoing battle, Cash, between good and evil. So we talked about it for 3 weeks. I hope that set a mindset for you. You know, I know one thing that touched you was that even a little match dispels darkness. You don't have to be a blowtorch. You know, even just a little match dispels darkness. But then I got to thinking, okay, so how do we fight this battle between good and evil? We've now established that there is good and evil, but how do we fight this battle? And I came up with 3 keys, and then we're going to pray. What is the difference between temptation trials and tests? Isn't that good? It can be good if I can lead it in the right direction. I think I will. But let's pray and ask for the guidance of the Holy Spirit. Father, we thank you for this time that we can be together. Really glad that Greg and Karen can be with us today, and glad that they can come back home, spend time with family and friends. We ask that you will please bless this class today, lead us and direct us, and watch over us. Be with Levi as he speaks to us this morning. Bless and touch his heart. Bless our hearts. Bless your name. Be with us, we ask, in Jesus' name. Amen. So Jim and Margie are on their way. They're a little bit late. They got stuck in some Sun City traffic or something. I don't know. But
so did Carla and DJ.
Oh, really? The same thing, huh? Well, okay. Darkness and evil, good and light. Darkness and light, good and evil. What is the difference, or is there a difference, between temptation, trials, and tests? How many think there's a difference between the 3? I think we would generally all agree that there are differences, right? This gets a little more vague. Trials and tests get a little more vague. But how would you define a temptation in lieu of a trial or a test? How would you define a temptation? Rebecca?
I think a temptation would be something that you would be attracted to, something that you might be desiring, yeah.
So a temptation is, so you wouldn't necessarily desire a trial.
No.
You wouldn't necessarily desire a test. How many like tests when you're in school? Oh, I love tests. It helped me understand how much I've learned and where I need to. I hated tests. Bethany, you issue tests. You enjoy doing that. I know you're a man.
Then she has to grade the papers.
Yeah, then she has to grade the papers.
Well, then I find out what they don't know.
Yeah, you find out, and it breaks your heart. So how can they be so? Never mind. So a temptation is something that you desire. How would you define it? Is there anything more anybody wants to add to that besides?
God doesn't do it. So
All right, God.
Tempt anyone. So all the lower 2 are probably.
Where does this lead to?
Sin.
Where does this lead to? We're going to look at that verse in James in just a little bit. So something that's desirous, forget the spelling. Something that's desirous that leads to sin and ultimately leads to death. That's temptation. Jerry.
I just think one of the greatest things in the whole Bible is that when you realize what you're saying, that temptation is something that looks good at least. And Christ was tempted in all ways as we are and did not sin, and shows us that just the temptation is not the sin, it's the giving into it or stand
Good point. We're going to be looking at a lot of those verses over today and the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, whatever. Being tempted isn't the sin. Giving in to the temptation becomes the sin. Would you guys buy into that? Yeah. We have to, because Jesus was tempted, right? Okay. All right. Now, what's a trial? By the way, we're also going to be, once we get through this, what are the sources of temptation? Where does temptation come from? We'll talk about that. What's a trial?
Difficulties.
A what?
Difficulties.
Difficulties? A trial. A trial. What's a trial? I'm going through a real trial right now.
They can happen to all people at the same time.
It can happen to individuals or all people at the same time.
So like war or famine, natural disasters, things that put you in a bad position.
Is Ukraine going through a trial?
In a court system, isn't it you're on trial to determine whether you did right or wrong?
Okay. Rebecca says a trial is perhaps something that determines if we're right or if we're wrong. You can be found
Guilty.
or not guilty. Wow. Where do trials come from? What's that, Brian?
Or a hung jury.
Or a hung jury. I don't know. He could be innocent. He could be guilty. That's right. And usually a hung jury ends up what? Having a retrial, right? Retrial. Where do trials come from?
External.
External. Greg says trials are external. Would anyone say trials can also be internal?
They can come from poor choices.
They can come from poor choices. And that's internal.
Are you not having a trial with God?
Only when it comes to me losing to you.
I haven't.
Yeah, every time I swing a golf club, there's a trial. Trial. What is a test?
Where would health come in?
Where would health come in?
Cancer, that's internal.
Maybe it's external, outside my body and not supposed to be there, but
So health-wise, how about financial? How about relationships? Trials can take many different forms, right? What is the ultimate, if temptation's ultimate is death, sin and death, what about a trial?
A learning experience.
A learning experience that can either make us or perhaps break us, right? It can make us either a bitter person, Roy, or a better person, right? Just depends. Trials are interesting.
You could die and not be guilty.
You could die and not be guilty. Wow, you guys are thinking today. You got your thinking caps on.
I think trials tend to lend themselves to seasons or periods of time.
Trials are, generally speaking, trials are temporary, situational, could be long-term, could have a long-term health issue, but generally there's situational or seasonal, right? This too shall pass. That's probably a good phrase for a trial. this too shall pass. All right, then what is a test? Why do you give tests, Bethany?
To assess what students have learned.
All right, to assess. Do students have tests in the 2nd grade?
Yes.
Do students have tests in the 8th grade? Do postgraduates have tests? So tests can be at different magnitudes, but it seems as though tests stick around for a while. The reason I don't go back to school is because I don't want to take any tests. Anyone ever cram for a test?
The thing about tests or assessments or exams or whatever is that they are appropriate, speaking in education, they're appropriate for the grade level. So you wouldn't give a 2nd grader an 8th grade level test. And I think in life, that's also a consideration that God gives us too. Like, if God's going to test us, then he's not going to give us a test that would be inappropriate for where we are in our spiritual walk.
Ooh. Peter walking on water. Temptation, trial, or test? Test, maybe. Temptation, trial, or... Get out of the boat. They're in a boat, Roy. They're in a boat in a storm. And all of a sudden, they see what appears at first to be somewhat like a ghost, right? And as this appearance gets closer, they recognize it's Jesus, and Jesus has the audacity to say to Peter, did he say it to Peter or everybody? And Peter was the one that acted. I have to look it up. Says to Peter, it's about time BJ and Carla got to class. Oh wait, hi guys. I know you had traffic troubles. Thank you for being so diligent and still making it.
Tucson has really grown.
Tucson has really grown.
It was Satan or the ADOT that did not want us to come to church, but we persevered.
That's right. Was that a trial? Encouraged to get out of the boat, walk on water. Trial, test, or temptation? A test. Did he pass?
No. For a short time.
For a short time. Until he... Through what's that?
3 steps more than...
3 steps more than any of the rest of us, perhaps, yeah. Yeah. He passed until he looked at the water, right? So trials, temptations, tests. We're doing this in the context of good and evil, light and darkness. How do we fight that? And these 3 words came to my mind: trials, tests, and temptations.
I believe that testing really comes from God.
Uh-huh.
When I said testing comes from God, you have to have his approval before you can be tested. But I believe he also has to approve the others as well. And Job definitely was in all 3. He was tested. It became a trial, and he certainly was tempted to curse God and die, but he overcame all of it.
So in Job's life, over this period of time, he was tempted, he experienced trials, and he was tested. Do you think maybe the same is for us? Do you think in our lives it's possible to be tempted, have trials, and be tested? The answer is, of course. Okay? But the source of a test, when the kids in school get a test, who's the source? Generally speaking, the teacher, right? Teacher passes out an exam, right, Margie? Here's your test. Let's see what you want. If you go to motor vehicle to get your driver's license, that's a test, and someone on the other side of the counter is going to ask you, what are the letters in line 3? Right? If it's the first time you've gone for your license, you'll probably have to take a license exam issued by the authority, whomever it might be there. Yes, someone, Greg.
I had to look it up because I couldn't remember for sure. So Peter walking on water, he actually tested Jesus. He said, if it is you, tell me to come out on the water.
Oh, wow.
And then it turned around into a
Wow.
test on him.
Wow. So does God test? The answer is yes, I think he does. Now, does God test to see how far we've come? God knows how far we've come or not come, right? So he doesn't test us for his sake. Who's he test us for? Our sake. We might say, wow, today I walked 3 steps on water. Last month I couldn't have done that, you know. Wow, today somebody flipped me off on the freeway and I didn't get mad. Wow, I might have done that 6 months ago. I might have given the peace sign right back, you know. Hey, yesterday I hit 2 balls out of bounds on the same hole. There was a time I might have thrown the club out of bounds. There's been times when my golf club went further than my golf ball. You think that I'm not joking. I'm not joking. Right? You see what I'm saying? So the test that God produces for us is not for God's sake. God knows, right? God tests us for whose sake? Our sake. And maybe, just maybe, when someone says, how'd you do in that test? I think I did pretty good. I might have missed a couple, but I think I did pretty good. And how do you feel when you think you did pretty good and you get back and you get a 98 on your test? You feel pretty good, right? All right, so that's a general introduction, and you guys are with me. Remember, we're doing this in light of how do we deal with darkness and light and sin and righteousness and good and evil. But we got to spend time breaking these down. And that's where it gets a little tougher. A little tougher. And seeing that Brian and Diane are only going to be here a couple more weeks, I decided to start with temptation. I love Brian and Diane. Can you guys tell that? Let's take a vote. Do we love Brian and Diane? Let's take a vote. Oh, well, it's almost unanimous.
We love you guys.
Yeah.
We love.
Let's go to James chapter 1. I think Jerry was the one who was referring to this. James 1, verses 13, 14, and 15. Who wrote the book of James? James, you didn't say Paul. You could have said Paul. You might have been right. Yeah. You were going to holler Paul, weren't you? Yeah. Because I say all the time, if you don't know, just say Paul. You got a 50-50 chance of being right.
That was my temptation.
That was your temptation. James, half-brother of Jesus, I think most would agree. How would you like to be the half-brother of Jesus? You know what? I have 2 brothers. We're all born 6 years apart. I'm 70, Ed's 76, Bob is 82, and within 30 days we all make the switch, right? In 5th grade, we all had the same 5th grade teacher, Miss Thompson, Marie Thompson. She had my brother Bob, she had my brother Ed, and she had me. And you know what she said by the time she had me?
You were the best.
Why can't you be more like your brother?
Joey, you're nothing like Bobby and Eddie.
I got that all the time. Why can't you be more like Cheryl?
Yeah. So how would you like to be James and be the half-brother of Jesus? Can you imagine his mother? James, Jesus never did that. Jesus never talked back to me. Jesus always did as I asked the first time. James, that would be a mess to be the half-brother. But you know what? He was pretty good. James is pretty good. In fact, the matter is, James is so doggone practical. You know, when you read the book of James, he doesn't mince words, you know. James is just so flat out. Roy, book of James is what, 4 chapters? 5 chapters? 5 chapters in the book of James. You can read it in 30 minutes or less, and you can spend a lifetime trying to figure out everything he said. But you'll understand, not figure out how to do everything he said, but apply. Because you'll understand exactly. There isn't, what did he mean by that in James? There might be in some other ones, but not in James. James tells you exactly what he thinks.
James quotes Jesus more than any other book in the New Testament.
Is that right? Yeah. We call that, Rollins, straight talk. Straight talk. All right, now we're back to James. Chapter 1, 13, 14, 15. Bethany, you have those 3 verses? You're not Jeff, but...
Thanks. When tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when, by his own evil desire, he is dragged away and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death.
Wow. Can we all say wow? Wow. Well, first of all, what's the very first thing we know about temptation, according to James? What's the very first thing we know about temptation? God doesn't produce temptation. It does not come, God doesn't tempt. We know that because James specifically says, God does not tempt you. Okay? So we can't say, well, God, why are you putting this in front of me? We can't say that. God says, I didn't put that in front of you. Right? God doesn't tempt. Now, why is it that God doesn't tempt? Why doesn't God tempt?
Because he's not evil.
He's not evil, and temptation is the breeding ground for what? It's not sin, but it is the breeding ground for sin, which is the breeding ground for, and God's in the business of life, not death. Right? So we can confidently say, if I'm going through a temptation, and I know it's a temptation, then I can confidently say, this is not of God. Right? This is not of God, because God doesn't tempt. Now, the other fascinating thing about this, can I take a little rabbit trail for about 30 to 60 seconds? Okay? God does not tempt, and what's right after God does not tempt? Neither can he what? Uh-oh! Say that again.
God cannot be tempted.
One more time for emphasis.
God cannot be tempted.
Therefore, if God cannot be tempted, Diane, tell me this. After he was baptized and in the wilderness, who was tempted 3 times? Jesus. Now, BJ, God cannot be tempted. And Diane just said Jesus was tempted how many times?
3.
And we can look at Hebrews where he says he was tempted not only 3 times, but he was tempted in all ways such as we are. So it was more than just 3 times. It was more than 3 times. In all ways such as we are, yet what? Yet without. Now, Margie, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I think I can figure out if God cannot be tempted and Jesus was tempted, it's awful hard for Jesus to be whom?
God, no.
And I'm not trying to be smart. Well, maybe I am a little bit. I'm not trying to put others. I'm through that stuff. I was that stuff in college and early ministry. I think I'm through that stuff. But if people would just open the eyes and just think for a moment. And I know what the response is. Well, that was the human Jesus, not the divine Jesus. All I know is God can't be tempted and Jesus was tempted. And let you figure it out from there.
When I was in seminary, we probably spent like 2 hours in systematic theology discussing that. And the professor knew my position, and he kind of let me egg the other people on. It was just interesting. And they did wrestle with the idea, honestly. I mean, they were trying to figure out how that made sense. But At the same time, they did not really say that Jesus was truly tempted to the point where he could have done something wrong.
Well, then that leads for the next question. I'm glad you brought that out because this is not in my notes. If you can't do something, are you really tempted? Can I tempt you to do something that you can't do? And I would say no. It's only a temptation if I have the ability to give in to that temptation. If I don't have the ability to give in, it's really not. I'll give you, for instance, pecan pie. I'm coming right over to you. Have you ever tasted Jane's pecan pie?
Yes, that's wonderful.
It is like to die for.
Is it divine? Is it divine?
As close on this earth as it can be. It's really good. The crust is so flaky. And the sweet is just perfect. And if you throw a little ice cream on top of it,
It's to die for.
if someone puts a piece of Jane's pecan pie on my table, it is a huge temptation for me to eat it, Rebecca. And more often than not, I am going to give in. Dana can look at that same piece of pie and say, "Can I have a bite?" And I give her a bite, begrudgingly. I give her a bite. And she says, "Oh, that was good." And then she goes on to eating her vegetables. How is that possible? That's just not right. That is just not right. She can eat one potato chip. She can take whatever. So, but the question is, if you can't be tempted, if you can't do something, are you truly tempted?
Well, now that you've planted that seed in my mind, someday, next time I run into a pecan pie, what's going to happen to me? What's going to become of me then?
Well, if you guys notice, whenever we have a fellowship dinner and Jane's pecan pie is over there, you guys can have all the meat you want. My first stop is the pecan pie. Make sure I get a bite or a piece or two. Yes?
Jesus gave us how to pray, the Lord's Prayer. What does it mean in there?
Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. And I think what Jesus is saying is that he is praying that we don't take that step into temptation, but God deliver us from that. Mm-hmm. Now, here's the really fascinating thing about James 1:13. God, and thank you for letting me go off on that rabbit trail. Now I'm back on. But it's something that seems so simple to me. God cannot be tempted, neither does he tempt anyone with evil. And then what's the next verse after that, baby?
But each one is tempted when by his own evil desire he is dragged away and enticed.
According to James in this verse, what is the source of temptation? According to this particular text, what is the source of temptation? Our own desires.
Evil.
Our own evil desires. We don't have to go very far before we can be corrected and say, well, the devil made me do it. Could it be someone as sweet as this lady be tempted by her own evil desires? And the answer is, and I love you. But the answer is yes. The answer is yes. And that's not a indictment on Irene. That's an indictment on this thing we call human nature. Right, Rebecca?
I was just reading in Genesis yesterday
Mm-hmm.
about the flood.
Okay.
And God said, man's inclination is evil from his youth.
Wow. Wow, that's in Genesis?
Genesis 8, verse 21.
It doesn't take very long before that sweet little infant child that you're holding, that you're nuzzling and everything, doesn't take very long for that sweet little innocent child to be not so innocent and so sweet. We call them terrible twos for a reason. Right?
Hey, Jeff?
Yes.
Sorry to,
No.
but going backwards, but in the Lord's Prayer, when he says, lead us not into temptation,
Mm-hmm.
that really should be,
Trial.
lead us not into time of trials.
Time of
Go
trials.
back with that idea that God does not tempt us.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, there are times and if we look at a different translation, sometimes trial is translated trial, and sometimes the word we see is temptation when it should be trial. And what I'm hearing you say, this is probably one of those.
just
Yeah, yeah. That's, lead us not into trials, but deliver us from evil. Yeah.
the evil one.
The evil one. Yeah, the evil one. So we know this much, that one of the sources for temptation, we don't have to look any further than in the mirror, right? In fact, I would contend that's probably the main source of temptation. The main source of temptation today in my life, Carla, is me. I don't have to go much further than that. But are there other sources of temptation? Is it strictly us?
It has to appeal to something in us.
Has to appeal to something in us. Okay.
I would say yes. It's strictly us. Because I think when you go back to temptation, for us Christians, we know right and wrong. Paul even said it. The things I want to do, I don't do, and the things that I don't do, I should do. I mean, he knew right and wrong. I think the problem that you have is those that don't know, is it truly temptation for them because they're not knowledgeable in it. So if it comes down to that, what other source is there? Even if I was trying to tell you, hey, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, if you know it's wrong, doesn't matter what I say. And you can use me as a lie, you know, he kind of explained it, it sounded good to me, and I thought it was right. But truly, you knew if it was right or wrong. Falls on you.
But
And if it's not in my own ability or in my own, like if I don't even want it, then it's not a temptation.
But
So
can't
I agree
Diane
with
tempt
Brian.
me to go do something with her? Go spend a lot of money. Not that that's sin, but I'm just trying to think of something, you know.
Let's go to Job chapter 2, verse 9. I'll give you an idea. Job. God's friend Job. How would you like to be the friend of God? Whoa.
Job what?
2, verse 9. Someone have that?
His wife said to him, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die."
Whoa! Why don't you just curse God and die? Is that a temptation? Is that a source of temptation for Job?
I don't think so.
No.
Let's go to 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel. Let's go to, I'll get you guys, let's go to 2 Samuel, chapter 11. I'll go there with you. Not 2 Samuel, I'm sorry. Let's go to Judges 16. Judges 16. Who wrote the book of Judges? Judge Judy. Judge Judy. Judge Judy. Don't you guys know anything? Judges 16. Let's pick it up. Oh, golly. 6. Judges 16:6. Delilah and Samson. So Delilah said to Samson, please tell me where your great strength is and how you may be bound to afflict you. Samson said to her, if they bind me with 7 fresh cords that have not been dried, then I will become weak and be like any other man. Then the lords of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh cords that had not been dried, and she bound with them. Now she had men laying in wait in an inner room, and she said to him, Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he snapped the cords as a string of tow snaps when it touches fire. So his strength was not discovered. Then Delilah said to Samson, behold, you have deceived me and told me lies. Now please tell me how you may be bound. And he said to her, if they bind me tight with new ropes, which have not been used, then I will become weak. And we know the same thing happens again, right? Then verse 13, then Delilah said to Samson, up until now you have deceived me and told me lies. Tell me how you may be bound. And he said, if you have weaved 7 locks of my hair with the web, fasten it with a pin, I will become weak like the others. So he slept. He woke and broke out the pin. Then she said to him, how can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You've deceived me 3 times and have not told me what your great strength is. It came about when she pressed him daily with her words and urged him that his soul was annoyed to death. That's another word saying, woman, just be quiet. Annoyed to death. Reminds me of the kid who asked for a candy bar at the checkout line at the grocery store. Daddy, please, daddy, 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 please, 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 daddy. So he told her all that was in his heart and said to her, a razor shall never come to my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I will become weak like any other man. Wow. 3 times he told her untruths, and then she did it. Do you love me or don't you love me? Why do you say you love me and then you make a mocker of me? And he told her what was in his heart. Was he tempted from inside or from others?
I think he was tested and he failed.
You think he was tested? Well, let me ask you this. Did that temptation lead to sin? Yeah.
I'm not sure. Did God tell him not to tell anybody what was going on?
Greg, when is it you head back to Texas? Karen, you can stay. Greg, you're starting to test me.
I agree, I didn't see it as a temptation because I didn't see it as that internal desire for something he was desperate for, you know? I don't know. I was just questioning that as
He wanted her to love him.
Right.
And he wanted to love her and be honest with him, I guess.
He might have put himself in a bad situation by marrying her in the first place.
Right.
Which could have been a temptation.
All right, let me give you one more example and then we'll get this figured out. Let's go to Genesis 16. Isn't this good, Jim? Say yes, Jim.
Yes.
Thank you. Genesis 16. Verses 2, 3, 4, and 5. Let's go to this one. This is not bad. Since you're there, we'll read it. 2, 3, 4, and 5. So Sarah said to Abraham, now behold, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Please go into my maid. Perhaps I will obtain children through her. And Abraham listened to the voice of Sarah. And after Abraham lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Abraham's wife Sarah took Hagar, the Egyptian, her maid, and gave her to her husband and Abraham as his wife. He went in to Hagar. She conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her sight. And Sarah said to Abraham, May the wrong done to me be upon you. I gave my maid into your arms, but when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her sight. May the Lord judge between you and me. Sarah was messed up. Right? Now, who was tempted? And who tempted whom? Sarah said to her husband, go in with Hagar, because I can't have children. That's probably the first mistake. The mistake believing that she couldn't have children. But then she complicated that mistake by saying to her husband, go into another woman. Now, I suppose we could say it was still his own evil heart, because if he was strong enough, he wouldn't have gone in with that other woman. It's like Dallas Dimmitt used to say to me, your uncle.
Hear what you say.
Yeah. I'm hearing you say, I'm hearing you say, I'm hearing you say. This is what Greg's uncle would say. No one can make you mad. It's a choice. Good old Dallas. You know my response to Dallas Dimmitt, his uncle, when he said to me, no one can make you mad? My response, Roy, was, yeah, but some people make it so easy to choose that. Right? Yeah. So easy to choose that. No one can make me mad, Sam, but boy, I tell you what, there are certain people who make it so easy to choose that. And so, I don't know, I suppose if you get it all the way down to the bottom base, maybe. But I'm kind of like Carla saying, you know what, I never would have gone there if they wouldn't have suggested it in the first place. All right, so that's Genesis 16. Let's go to Genesis 39. This is the topper. Genesis 39, 7, starting with verse 7. Oh, whoa, look at what time it is. All right, I'm having so much fun today. We'll read it, and then I'll make a comment, and then get you out of here, and we'll talk about it next week. Genesis 39, beginning with verse 7. Now Joseph was handsome in the form of appearance. It became after these events that his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph, and she said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, with me here my master does not concern himself. And she tore her clothes off, and the Potiphar's wife tried to seduce Joseph, right? The temptation that Joseph had to have experienced came from another source. Now, to Joseph's credit, he did not give in to the temptation. That doesn't mean to me that he wasn't tempted. It means his character was strong enough that he didn't give in to that temptation. But that temptation, the source came from somebody else, because he wasn't thinking it on his own. Would you buy into that? Maybe?
Because we know that Potiphar's wife wanted Joseph. We don't know that Joseph wanted Potiphar's wife. So if he wasn't even tempted by her, maybe he knew that she was mean and ugly, but so it wasn't even a temptation, so it was easy for him to run away. We don't know the other side.
But he's a man.
I can leave this discussion in good hands. Right?
Yeah, he's a man. She didn't have to be pretty.
Maybe Sarah
But maybe
was
her
tempted
character,
to
he was
have
turned
faith.
off by her character.
Just go back to the garden.
I'm tempted to just leave this class.
I think instead of it being a temptation, it was a test for Joseph. Just like...
Well, was Joseph a temptation to the Potiphar's wife?
Yes.
He was handsome.
Well, you got half right, though.
Yes.
All right, we'll pick it up next week. Love you all. Oh.